Time Papa Got Lost. Part D. Papa dismounted. He folded his arms and stared at that granite wall as if it had a lot of nerve being there. I knew we were hopelessly lost and began to cry. "Stop that blubbering, J.D.," Tom said. "It will upset Papa." I think Dad is already upset," Swin said. "We are lost for sure. I've only about a dozen shells left for my rifle, and I doubt if Dad has any shells left for the shotgun." "Who needs shells?" Tom asked. "Let's build a lean-to for Papa first, and then set some deadfall traps." Papa sat down on a boulder and stared at the granite cliff as though, if he stared at it long enough, it would disappear. Us boys unsaddled Dusty and unpacked Bess. We put hobbles on them and turned them loose to graze. "Dad has got us into a mess," Swin said as he got the axe we had salvaged from the wreck. "If it was just a mess, I wouldn't care," I said, "but I think Papa has got us lost in these mountains." "Crying over spilt milk won't do any good," Tom said. "We've got to make camp and make sure we have something to eat. Let's get busy." We followed Swin to a grove of aspen trees. We found 2 strong, Y-shaped branches on them. Swin cut them off with the axe. Tom cut the small branches off of them with his jackknife. We went back to where we were going to make our campsite. With his jackknife, Tom dug 2 holes about 6 inches deep and about 10 feet apart. We stuck the aspen poles in the holes with the Y on top and packed dirt around them. By that time, Swin joined us with a straight branch of a tree from which he'd chopped off all the branches. Tom stripped enough bark from it to make thongs with his jackknife. Then he put the poles between the Ys on the poles and the ground and lashed them together with the bark. We got the piece of tent we'd salvaged and draped it over the poles between the 2 Ys. Then we put rocks all around the edge of the piece of tent so the wind wouldn't blow it away. Next, we cut some pine branches and carried them into the tent to use for a mattress. "That will take care of Papa," Tom said. "We can sleep in our blankets around the campfire. Now for some deadfalls." We walked along the bank of the river until we came to a game trail used by animals that came down to the river to drink at night. While Tom carved sticks for the deadfall, Swin and I found 3 big flat slabs of rock, which we carried to the game trail. We waited until Tom had carved the notches in the sticks to spring the trap of the deadfall. Then I picked some wild clover along the bank of the river. Tom used some blades of wild grass to tie the clover to the end of the stick that would trigger the deadfall. Then he set the figure 4 of the deadfall with 3 sticks together and their notches. He held the figure 4 while Swin and I carefully placed one end of the flat slabs of rock on top of it. When a rabbit or any other small game animal nibbled on the bait on the end of the bait stick, it would dislodge the notches on the other 2 sticks and cause the flat rock to fall on it, and so that it would be under the rock in the morning. When we returned to our campsite, Papa was still sitting on the boulder. Tom and I made a campfire. Swin went hunting and used 2 of his precious shells to kill a rabbit and 1 quail, which we had for supper. I was scared and felt like crying, and Papa sure didn't help matters after we finished eating. "I don't want to alarm you boys," he said as he puffed on his pipe, "but things look quite serious." Swin doubled up his knees and held them with his hands. "Mom certainly must have told Uncle Mark to come look for us when we didn't get back on time," he said. "Where would he look?" Papa asked. He had no idea where we were going except up Beaver Canyon. "But he could find the tracks of the horses and buckboard," Swin said. "You are forgetting that cloudburst we had," Papa said. "It certainly washed out any tracks made by the horses and the buckboard." I couldn't hold back the tears any longer and began to cry. "We're going to die," I sobbed. "We certainly aren't going to die," Papa said. "I read an article one time about a man who was lost in the Rocky Mountains for 5 years. He managed to live on small game, fish, pine nuts, and wild berries until finally he was rescued by some trappers." Then Papa stood up and stretched. "I think it is time to bed down now," he said. Papa went into his lean-to. We wrapped ourselves in our blankets and lay down around the fire. Papa sure didn't make me feel any better with that story of the man lost for 5 years. We were going to die in these mountains. I would never see Mama or Aunt Bertha or any of my friends again. Someday some renegade might find us. That would perhaps be better than living the rest of our lives in the wilderness. That meant only one thing. Someday some intrepid explorer or trapper would come across our bleached bones and wonder who we were. We were doomed to die in this wilderness. Tom touched my shoulder. Gosh sakes, J.D., he whispered. Stop that bawling and go to sleep. I can't help it, I cried softly. We are doomed to live the rest of our lives in these mountains, eating grasshoppers, ants, wild berries, pine nuts. Will you shut up with that doomed business? Tom interrupted me. You don't think for a minute I let my great brain let us get lost in these mountains, do you? I felt like laughing and crying at the same time. What a fool I had been when I had my brother and his great brain with us. God bless your great brain, I said, and promptly fell asleep. The next morning we found we'd caught 2 rabbits in our deadfalls and 4 trouts on our night fishing poles. We ate the trout for breakfast and saved the rabbits. Papa was very quiet. After we had finished eating, Papa went back to the boulder and sat staring at that 1,000-foot-high granite cliff, as if trying to come to some decision. We had just finished washing the tin plates and knives and forks when he motioned to us. Boys, he said as we stood in front of him. I'd never seen his face so serious. I think we should start building a log cabin. How are you going to build a cabin without a saw and a hammer and nails and things? Wynne asked. The same way the early pioneers did, Papa answered, using the bark of aspen trees to bind the logs together and mud from the banks of the river to chink up the cracks between the logs. And there's a ledge of flat rock over there we can use to build a fireplace. We must prepare for the worst and hope for the best. It may be years before someone finds us.